Hello, my name is Weston Mansier. I'll be doing my project on home field advantage in the Premier League by analyzing 20 years of Premier League data. So what are my project goals? Well, firstly, I want to determine if teams are generally more successful when playing at home. I want to identify which teams specifically are better at home and which teams are worse. And then I want to attempt to quantify the advantage given by playing. Let's take a look at my data set. My data was pulled from football-data.co.uk. This is a website that has data on football matches all throughout Europe, especially for all the major leagues. The data was in a separate data frame for each season of the Premier League. So there was a file for each season from 2003 to 2022. It contains information on the home and away teams of every match. So there are important variables such as the home team, the away team, full-time result, goals, that sort of thing. My data cleaning process was relatively simple. First, I just needed to clean out some of the unnecessary variables. This included essentially the betting data. A lot of the newer data frames had information on betting odds and things like that. This already has a decent amount of modeling built into it, so I wasn't really interested in using this because I think it would make the job a little easier. I then combined each of the separate data frames into one master data frame, which has 7,220 observations. And after I added some variables such as goals per half for each team, I had a total of 31 columns. My first graph produced for my exploratory data analysis is the results for the home team. So I'll note that on the x-axis is the home team result. This means if the for this column H here, that means the home team won, B means there was a draw, and A means the away team won. So what this shows is that the home team does in fact seem to be more successful, winning about 1,000 more games than they lose, and draw is the least likely outcome. This is interesting because I figured the draw would be a little bit more likely, but what we'll see later is that I think home teams are especially not willing to draw, and so they're going to chase home victories or defeats a lot more. My second graph here is a bar graph of the best teams at home. So this first one here shows the quantity of games played at home and which team played that number of games. This is only the top 10 most frequently played at home teams. And you'll see that some of these teams seem to play, this number is 380. That means these teams have played in every single game in the last 20 years. And if you're wondering why all the teams don't have exactly an equal number of home games, that's because the English football system has a relegation system. So if you are one of the bottom three teams in the league, you get relegated to the tier below, and you can work your way back up by doing in the lower tiers. So these Arsenal, Chelsea, Everton, Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United, and Tottenham, these teams are what are known as the Big Six plus Everton. They have the most money, the biggest fan bases, and have generally been the most successful throughout their history. If you ask a soccer fan who their favorite team is in the United States, it will almost definitely be one of these seven teams. Then we're going to take a look at these same exact teams, but look at the average points that they get per game at home. And you'll find that those big six, the Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United, and Tottenham, are again at the very top of these lists as well. And you'll see a very large gap too between their average points per game and the teams below them, almost a full point. What this tells us is that the top teams are very high, very far above the teams below them. And remember, this is only the top 10. So if we start to look at the other teams and their home results, it's going to be an even greater difference. This graph shows us the average home team points over time. On the x-axis is the year, and the y-axis is the average home team points per game. I'll note that year 5, that indicates 2005, and year 20 would indicate 2020. What this shows us is that it seems like over time, maybe the home team is scoring less points at home, but it's hard to tell. It fluctuates every single year. It's very variable, variant. I will note also this year here where there was a very low number of points for the home team. This was the COVID year. They played games during COVID, after lockdown was done, but they didn't have any fans in the stadium. So this is actually a very important data point. It tells us that potentially a lot of the home field advantage is attributed to the fans rather than maybe the stadium or the field itself. And so that is a very interesting thing to note. This graph shows us the average fouls for home and away team. This one is also sort of a fan stat I was curious about, at least. I was wondering if maybe the fans have some influence over the refs and what kind of fouls that the refs give, that type of thing. But I generally realized that the refs give an equal number of fouls to the home and away team. There usually isn't much bias. But I guess you can look at this and say that the away team gets on average one more foul per game, but it's relatively negligible. This one shows us the halftime versus full-time results for the home team. And in orange are the full-time results, and in the green are the halftime results. What this one tells us, what I mentioned earlier, is that even if at halftime there's a draw, so it's tied at half, it seems like home teams are not willing to just settle for this draw, and they're going to be more aggressive, which is why you see an increase in the number of losses for the home team and a drastic increase for the number of wins for the home team. So it seems like they go into halftime, they hype up their players, and they say, be aggressive, go all out. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This graph is a little more complicated. What this one is the home and away team goals per each half. So this pink line, for example, is the average number of goals scored for the home team in the second half. What this graph shows us specifically is that the away team is very slow out the gate. They don't score many goals in the first half. They struggle to settle in. And in the second half, it seems like the home team gets a little bit of momentum, makes some changes, adjustments in the halftime, and they outscore their opponents by a significant amount in the second half. My conclusions and next steps. So my initial EDA does seem to indicate that teams are more successful when playing at home, but I plan to dive deeper into this by evaluating how much of this is due to money spent and just the name of the team. I will do this by adding another data set with transfer data, which indicates how much money a team is spending on their players. I also plan on doing a linear regression model to predict outcomes based on match stats such as fouls and offside and things like that. Thank you for listening.